you have your Bible, would you turn to the book of Exodus, chapter 20? Exodus chapter 20. If you don't have a Bible, we'd invite you to look on in one of the Bibles the church provides. They're either under your seat or in the rack in front of you, and in those Bibles, it's page 54. Exodus chapter 20. And we have the privilege of beginning a series on the Ten Commandments. Now, the Ten Commandments don't really need much of an introduction. They do happen to be the most famous piece of legislation in the history of mankind. They form the basis of most of the laws in Western civilization, and that's just a note of their importance in the secular world. They are of supreme importance in the Christian world, and although the Ten Commandments do change slightly because of Christ, they are still for us today a wonderful and essential way in which we can see a picture of what God requires of us as Christians. And so I'm excited as we'll begin to look through the Ten Commandments and see their application for us today. Well, they begin in Exodus chapter 20 in verses 1 and 2, and the text reads, "And God spoke all these words, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery." This is the opening line of the Ten Commandments, and this happens to be the very first words that God speaks to the children of Israel. Notice the first words that God speaks to them do not come at the beginning of the book of Exodus. They don't even come, the Ten Commandments don't even come at the beginning of the Bible. They come all the way here 20 chapters into the book of Exodus. And that's because the Ten Commandments do not establish a relationship between God and Israel. That relationship already exists before they're even given. God says to Israel, I'm Yahweh. I'm your God. I'm the one who's already rescued you. Israel and God have a relationship. And now it's on the basis of that relationship that God puts forward these Ten Commandments. And that's to help us to realize that obeying the Ten Commandments does not give us a relationship with God. We're not Christians because we obey the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments are given to those who are already in a relationship with God. And what they do is they spell out how we can enjoy the benefits of that relationship. To explain what I mean, let me use the example of marriage. I'm not married to Lisa because I do nice things for her or spend time with her. I'm married to Lisa because I went through a wedding ceremony and because she agreed, with a little bit of arm twisting, to be my wife. That wedding ceremony established a relationship. But the reason that I established a relationship is because I wanted to experience the benefits and the blessings of being in a relationship with her. And so now that we are married, I spend my time wanting to please her and to spend time with her. And when I do that, I enjoy the benefits of being married to her. The same is true with the Lord. We do not become Christians because we have obeyed the Ten Commandments. We become Christians when we respond to God's offer through Jesus Christ to have a relationship with us. It's that simple. God invites each and every individual to enter into a personal relationship with Him, to have Him as their God and to be His people. And when we accept that offer, we become Christians. But the reason we want to become Christians is because we want to enjoy the blessings and the benefits of having God as our God. And the Ten Commandments are absolutely vital for you and I to reap the benefits of being in a relationship with God. Well, the layout of these 10 commandments is important. They weren't just sort of given at random. There is an order and a design to how they were presented and how they were given. The first 3 commandments deal with our relationship with God, what God expects of us in our relationship to Him. The 4th commandment is a transition commandment, and then the remaining 6 commandments deal with our relationship to one another, our relationships to each other. And the whole 10 commandments can be summarized under love God, which is the beginning, and love your neighbor, which is how Jesus summarizes the 10 commandments. The beginning is about loving God. The end is about loving neighbor. Now, the first command that God gives us, He says, you are not to have any other gods besides me. And that's because God is unique. And God is deserving of all honor and all glory, and nothing and no one must be equal to God. The second commandment is that we should not make graven images. And that's because God is unique in His character and in His person. And there's nothing that you or I could make or draw or create that is worthy of God. And so He's not to be represented by idols or by images. The third commandment says that God is uniquely holy. And therefore we are not to misuse His name, meaning we're not to take His name, which represents His person, and attach it to things that are not worthy of Him. Don't misuse my name, He says. Now the fourth commandment is that transition commandment. It's in part focused on God, and it's in part focused on creation. He says, remember the Sabbath. Look to the Creator who on the 7th day rested, and do that for the sake of yourselves and the creation. The remaining 6 commandments are focused on our relationship with one another. And they begin not accidentally with, honor your father and mother. That's because when you and I are put into a family or put under authority, our mother, our father, those in authority over us, act as God in His stead for us. They are the authorities God has established. And when we choose to rebel against the authorities God has established, we are rebelling against God. And so God begins the commandments directed to our relationships to one another with the idea that we must honor those whom God has put in authority over us. The remaining commands, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, come in a decreasing order of seriousness. The first is the most serious. God says, do not murder. In other words, you must not take or destroy a life. Number 7, do not commit adultery, which has the idea of do not take or destroy a family or a marriage. Number 8, do not steal. Do not take or destroy someone else's livelihood or their property. Do not bear false witness. Means that we are not to take or destroy someone's reputation or what is thought of someone else. And then 10, do not covet, which means we should not desire to take or destroy someone else's things or possessions. Now, just a little aside, it is important that these come in some sort of order. And so this helps us as we think through practical issues. For example, when you think about the issue of abortion and you think about the issue of neglecting the poor, both are bad. Both are things that God absolutely frowns upon. But they're not equal, because abortion is a violation of the 6th commandment, to take or destroy a life. To neglect the poor is a violation of the 8th commandment. It's to steal from those who deserve to have a decent life, just like you and I. Both are bad, but we shouldn't say that they are equal. To take a life is worse than to neglect the poor. Well, this morning we get to focus on the single most important command of all of them. And it's the first command. It is the foundational command. It is the essential command. It is the command on which all the rest of the commands are built. And it is the single most important command for us today. It states in Exodus 20, verse 3, "You shall have no other gods before me," which literally means you should have no other gods in my presence, or you shall have no other gods in addition to me. You see, this commandment does not mean that there's only one God. That's true, but that's not what this command is saying. This command is saying there can be other gods, and you ought not to have them in your life in addition to me. No other gods in your life or my life but Yahweh, but the one true God. In fact, you can see this if you're holding an NIV. In verse 3, if you see the word before, there's a superscripted C right after it. And if you look down below or in the margin, for chapter 20, verse 3, superscript C, it says, or besides. That's another way to read that verse that gives some clarity as to what it's talking about. You shall have no other gods besides me. I am the one God you are to have. Now, this is illustrated nicely for us in the Bible, in a story that comes in the book of 1 Kings. And there in 1 Kings 18, the prophet Elijah comes to meet Ahab, who's the king of Israel. And Elijah says to Ahab in 1 Kings 18, "You've abandoned the Lord's commands and have followed the Baals." You followed these false gods. And so Elijah, the prophet, demands that Ahab, the king, get all the prophets of Baal and all the children of Israel and gather them around Mount Carmel. And Elijah appears and he says to the children of Israel, and I want you to notice this verse, because this verse is the verse that gives us real insight into what God's talking about in this first commandment. Elijah says to the people, "How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord, Yahweh, is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him." You see, the problem was not that Israel had abandoned Yahweh. That was not the issue. The issue was not that Israel had determined that Baal was God and Yahweh was not. The issue was they kept going back and forth. The issue was some days they woke up and said, "Yes, the God of the Bible is our God, let's obey him." And other days they woke up and said, "Hey, maybe Baal's God, let's obey him." And some days they followed God, and some days they followed Baal. And Elijah's coming to them saying, that's a violation of the first commandment. You're not supposed to have any other gods besides God. So which is it going to be, Israel? Get off the fence. If Baal's God, fine, follow him. If Yahweh's Lord, then follow him. But don't keep going back and forth and back and forth. That's what it means to have no other gods besides God. Now, you may be sitting there thinking, okay, well, that's important, that's good. But I'm relatively confident that I will not be following Baal or Molech or Hamosh or any of the other gods in the Old Testament. I don't think I'm going to follow any of them. I've not looked into all their teachings, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to not go with them. So great, let's go on to the second commandment. Well, it's not that easy. And that's because Baal in the Old Testament just represents one of a number of things that can be gods in our lives to rival the place of the one true God. And the person who helps us to see this the best, in my opinion, is Martin Luther. And he spoke about this commandment 500 some years ago, thinking about what is gods to us today. And he says this: whatever man loves, that is his God. For he carries it in his heart. He goes about with it night and day. He sleeps and wakes with it, be it what it may, wealth or pleasure or fame or renown. You shall have no other gods before me. What does this mean, Luther asks? It means we should fear, love, and trust God above everything else. Everything else. What that means is that anything that you and I might love, anything that you and I might hope for, anything that we might put our trust in, can potentially be a god to rival the one true God. Money can be a god. Fame can be a god. Children can be a god. Grandchildren can be a god. Cars can be a god. Houses can be a god. Jobs can be a god. America can be a god. Our past can be a god. Sports figures can be gods. Political figures can be gods. Our parents can be gods. Food can be a god. Anything. Did I leave anything out? Sex can be a god. Your fame can be a god. Your reputation can be anything you can think of that you could possibly hope for, trust in, or love has a potential to be a god to rival Yahweh. A God to take first place in our hearts. See, what the first commandment is saying is you should have nothing else in your life that is in the place where God is. The place that belongs to God. Let me illustrate for you what this might look like. Imagine that your spouse comes home one day and she's talking about her job and she's raving about her coworker Bob. And she's telling you how funny Bob is and how charming Bob is and how great Bob is. And you're thinking to yourself, Bob? That's the guy, isn't he the neglectful and abusive husband? But she's raving on and on. To make matters worse, imagine she has the gall while she's telling you how great Bob is to say to you, you know, some days I wake up and I wish I was married to Bob. How would that make you feel? What would your response be? Mine would be, hello, I'm right here. Why are you saying that? And Bob? Really? Bob? Now, would it make you feel any better if your spouse said, oh, don't worry, there's some days I wake up and I'm glad to be married to you? Does that make it better? Or imagine you're an employee at a company and you're sitting down with your boss and he's giving your performance review and he's telling you just how amazing you've been and what a great job you've done and how you surpassed all your goals and everybody loves working with you. And while he's telling all these great things, giving you this performance review, imagine he says to you, but you know what would be really great? If Sue had your job. And you're thinking to yourself, hello, I'm right here. Why are you telling me this? And Sue? Sue doesn't get anything done. She's always late. She's constantly causing problems in the office. Would it make you feel any better that while you were thinking about this, your boss said to you, no, don't worry, I'm glad some days that you're in this job and not Sue. Does that make it better? No. That's what God's saying. Don't waver between two opinions. There's only room in that top slot for me. Don't be about me one day and then be about something else another day. You see, when we're walking down the street and we think quietly to ourselves, if only I had a better job, then my life would be great. You see, the things that we are saying silently to ourselves, we're saying out loud to God, who's walking right there with us. And what do you think his response is? Hello, I'm right here. Why are you saying that to me? A job? A job is going to make your life great? I'm the one who makes life great. And you're dreaming about a job? Or imagine that you're sitting in your office and you're going over your finances and you think to yourself at your company, if we could just get this Michigan business tax repealed, then my business would really begin to take off. What you're saying silently in your heart, you're saying out loud to God, who's standing right there saying, hello, I'm right here. Who do you think gave you this business in the first place? Who do you think is the one who makes you succeed? Who's the one that's brought you these clients? And you're worried about tax structures? Or you're sitting in the schoolroom at lunch and you think quietly to yourself, if I could just become friends with Jenny, then I'd be popular. Then school would be great and everything would be great in life. What's God's response? Hello, I'm right here. I hear what you're saying. Jenny's going to make your life wonderful. I'm the one who's promised never to leave you or forsake you. I'm the one who loves you from the bottom of my heart. I'm the one who makes life wonderful. And you're dreaming about Jenny? I'm right here. That's right. It's easy to do, isn't it? So easy that I want us to spend a few minutes thinking about other ways in which we might do this. And so I'm going to ask us to think through a series of questions. I want you to think through them privately. Please don't raise your hand and please don't volunteer aloud whether this is you or not. But think through this. Number one, have you ever thought to yourself, if I just had more money, all of these problems would go away? It's actually a violation of the first commandment. You have another God besides God. It's money. You have something else you're looking towards or hoping in or desiring. Number two, have you ever said, if we could just get the right people elected to office, we could get this country back on track? If we could just get the right people on the Supreme Court, we could get some of these laws overturned. It's actually a violation of the first commandment. You have another God besides God, and it's politics. God is the one who raises up countries and brings them low. Have you ever thought to yourself, if I could just get in to see that particular doctor, I know she'd be able to figure out what's wrong with me and fix it. Or if I could just see that doctor, I know the surgery will turn out well because she's an expert in this field. That's actually a violation of the first commandment. You have another God besides God. It's the medical system. That's where your hope and trust is. If you could get the right doctor in the right situation, then everything would be okay. God is the one who brings healing. And God can do it through the most renowned doctor or through the least renowned doctor or through no doctor at all. Have you ever said to yourself, if my dad were just here, he'd be able to fix all the mess that I've gotten myself into. He could get me out of this. He'd know what to do in this situation. That's a violation of the first commandment. You have another God besides God, and it's your dad. It's your parents. He's the one you're looking to for help. God says, I'm the one who provides help. I might provide it through your dad. I might provide it through some other means, but I'm the one ultimately who can help you. Have you ever said to yourself, if I could just get married, then I'd be truly happy? That's a violation of the first commandment. You have another God besides God, and it's marriage. God is the source of joy and of happiness. He may bring some joy and happiness through marriage. He may choose to bring it another way, but marriage itself is not the source of joy and happiness and fulfillment. Have you ever said to yourself, if I could just have more friends, then going to school would be fantastic? That's a violation of the first commandment. You have another God besides God and its popularity. Have you ever said to yourself, if this economy would just turn around, then everything will be okay? It's a violation of the first commandment. You have another God besides God and its economics. God can provide no matter what the economy is. God's the one who ultimately takes care of us. And if the stock market is booming or busting, that has no difference or impact on our lives. Have you ever said to yourself, my kids are the only reason I get out of bed every morning? That's actually a violation of the first commandment. You have another God besides God, and it's your children. As wonderful as children are, God is the reason for life. Have you ever said to yourself, if I could just do a better job of selling myself at the next job interview, I'm sure I'll get the job. If I would just try harder in this relationship, I'm sure it will work out. If I just did a better job preparing for my sermons, they would go better. That's actually a violation of the first commandment. You have another God besides God. It's you. You see, we think to ourselves, as long as I'm not craving someone else's money or someone else's wife or someone else's life, as long as I'm not doing those things, then I haven't coveted, I haven't violated the 10 commandments. It's true, you've not violated the 10th commandment, but you may have violated the first commandment, which is, you shall have nothing in your life or in my life that you look to, that you hope in, that you long for in the same way we do God. And when we look at ourselves in the quietest moments and we look at what is in our heart, what do we think will really rescue us? What do we think will really make us happy? What do we think is really going to make our lives work? If it's anything other than God, God's saying, it ought not be that way. Now, it's easy to focus on the negative side of this commandment, to say, you're kidding me. Does that mean I can't daydream about money? I can't think constantly about politics and how that might fix things, and I can't have my heart's desire be a new car or a boat or those kinds of things? That's true. But if you focus just on that aspect of the first commandment, you lose the positive spin. And the positive spin is this: you can't have those things because you can have God. And that's the good news. See, you and I have the opportunity to have the God of all compassion, the God of grace, the God who loves us, the God who forgives us, the God who puts up with everything that we do, the God who's all powerful, the God who heals, the God who gave his son to die for us, that God who loves us more than we'll ever love ourselves, that God who always has our best interests in mind, that God can be our God. He can be in first place. That's the good news. What Elijah would say is, look, if money's God, go after money. If Yahweh's God, follow him. If sex is going to make you happy, pursue it. If God's going to make you happy, pursue him. If you think politics is the way to fix things, go after politics. If you think God's the way to fix things, go after God. Stop wavering between two opinions. you and I have the opportunity to not follow after money, to not follow after fame, to not try to run our own lives, to not be empowered by anything other than God. And that's the good news of the first commandment, that through Jesus Christ, God gives us an opportunity to have him be in our lives everything that we will ever need him to be. That's why he begins with, I am Yahweh. I am everything you will ever need me to be. Don't let someone else have my slot.